Changes in the Point Pleasant Park forest ecology and community structure over time by Sawyer, Van Oostrom, and Mackenzie Hewitt. Point Pleasant Park is located on Micmac territory in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and has been affected by various disturbances such as invasive species and human activity. However, secondary succession only happens after a disturbance clears out large amounts of vegetation, rooting habitats and forcing the ecosystem to begin a fresh start. Hurricane Juan influenced changes in species composition and landscape from when it tore through the park in 2003. Following a disturbance such as this one, it's typically the fast growing pioneer species that can survive and take advantage of being directly under the sun. Shade tolerant plant species typically establish themselves later in the succession and become dominant. A closed canopy will grow, along with the forest being considered a climax community. An ecosystem in climax is the final stage of succession where plants and animal species are in equilibrium with their environment and species composition is relatively stable. The end goal is to collect data to help similar Acadian forests recover after disturbance and learn to protect more vulnerable species. Certain flora and fauna are better at maintaining their numbers after a disturbance, as their range of tolerance is larger. Hurricane Juan happened on September 29, 2003, and was a Category 2 hurricane that traveled through Point Pleasant Park and caused canopy loss that changed the ecology of the forest, such as uprooting trees. Around 70% of the forest cover was removed and created ideal conditions for secondary succession to begin. Afterwards, data from permanent plots were monitored from 2004 to 2025, with some exceptions, to track the recovery. The total tree density, average diameter at breast height, Shannon's diversity index, and the density of the dominant species were recorded. The research questions are: how has the overall forest community changed over time? Why? What can you predict will happen to the overall community as the forest moves towards its climax community? Why? How has the density of the dominant species in 2004 as well as the dominant species in 2025 changed over time? What can you predict will happen to the dominant species as the forest moves towards its climax community? Why? Our aims are to evaluate the long-term changes in the forest structure of Point Pleasant Park by examining trends in the total trees density and the Shannon Diversity Index of the ecological community from 2004 to 2025. The alternative hypothesis suggests an increase in density and richness since Hurricane Juan. The null hypothesis states there has been no change in diversity and richness. It is predicted that the forest will continue to diversify and thicken as it reaches its species climax and it's more stable. Next, we are looking to analyze whether the two dominant species, red spruce and red maple, show a change in density over time post-Hurricane Juan, and whether we predict their establishment in Point Pleasant to change once the park reaches its climax community. The alternative hypothesis predicts there will be an increase in density of the two species, while the null hypothesis states there has been no change. We predict that once the Acadian forest has stabilized, these trees will decrease in density, but continue to be good competitors. The red spruce will do better than the red maple as it's persistent in an abundance of weather and low light levels, such as when the canopy is reestablished.
In 2004, 6 study sites were established at Point Pleasant Park. Each was 20 meters by 20 meters in size. The requirements for a tree to be included was that it had to be living and have a diameter of greater than 2.5 centimeters at breast height. Diameter at breast height is 4.5 feet above the ground, which is important for consistent comparisons between measurements taken by multiple researchers. The trees were then identified using the XXX guide. Then, the diameter was measured with a diameter measuring tape. Using these measurements, multiple metrics were calculated. The average tree diameter and density was calculated for the different number of species. Then, species richness, or number of unique species, was determined. Species diversity was calculated using the Shannon-Weiner index. Community evenness was calculated using Pylew's evenness index. And lastly, a regression analysis was performed. At the 6 study sites in Point Pleasant Park, there was a positive moderate correlation of R squared equals 0.4485 between the total density of trees and time in years, from 2004 to 2025. This indicated that the density increased as the forest progressed towards a climax community. At the 6 study sites in Point Pleasant Park, there was a positive moderate correlation of R squared equals 0.3262 between the Shannon Diversity Index and time in years, from 2004 to 2025, indicating that the species richness and evenness increased as the forest progressed towards a climax community. The data supports the hypothesis that the forest will increase in density and species richness as it progresses towards a climax community. According to a study done by Burley et al. 2008, natural regeneration is occurring following Hurricane Juan. They indicated that regeneration could be influenced by the park rangers' efforts to remove fast-growing trees. The findings from Turchin 2016 showed that 70,300 trees were planted in areas of the park that were at high risk of erosion in 2007 and 2008. This likely led to the significant increase in the number of trees over time, allowing the richness and diversity to increase from 2006 to 2015. These studies show that hard work from society can help forest areas recover from natural disaster damages.
One of the dominant species from 2004 to 2025 was the red maple tree, which had only increased in density every year since Hurricane Juan hit. Looking at Figure 5, the linear regression is used to analyze the relationship between the tree density per 400 meters squared to determine if it has stayed the same or increased. A p-value of 0.0003 determines that the change is significant and HO is rejected. The r-squared value of 0.13351 is also statistical evidence that the graph is showing a positive incline. Therefore, it is accepted that the density of red maple trees has increased since Hurricane Juan. Red maple tree numbers were especially high in 2019 at 189 trees in one site, but decreased again to around 80 trees per site by 2025. These trees tend to be very flexible in terms of tolerating both dry and wet environments and can colonize land fast. Sprout seeds can even grow from the roots of another maple tree. This species typically does well in early to mid-successional periods in forests, as is the case here. It is predicted that this species will become less dominant as the ecosystem recovers, but as it has a broad niche and is a good competitor, it will remain a common species in Point Pleasant Park, but perhaps not as common as the red spruce. The red maple tree is an aggressive competitor, but the red spruce is persistent and does better in mature forests. Another dominant species from 2004 to 2025 was the red spruce tree. Figure 6 demonstrates a linear regression showcasing the relationship between red spruce trees per 400 meters squared. In other words, the graph aims to determine if the density of red spruce trees has remained the same or increased since Hurricane Juan passed through Point Pleasant Park. Based on the r-squared value being 0.1306 and the p-value becoming significant at 0.0004, the null hypothesis is rejected, and it is accepted that there's been an increase in red spruce density. It, too, has increased over time since Hurricane Juan. The red spruce is content in shady areas in low light, as well as stormy Halifax weather like fog, precipitation, and humidity. It's expected that the red spruce will outlast trees growing under the canopy once the ecosystem is recovered and continue to be a dominant species, but will lower in density once more variety is regrown in Point Pleasant. Parks such as Point Pleasant are taken care of by urban management to help manifest diversity and are key factors in shaping the ecosystem. As a result, it will help grow back native biodiversity faster than when a completely natural ecosystem would.
In conclusion, the forest is likely in mid-succession, since after 19 years of assisted regeneration, there are many trees established, but the forest is not mature, as the graphs and studies show that the densities are still increasing. Point Pleasant Park is an urban park. How does this affect succession? Park rangers cleaned up woody debris throughout the park for public safety and to reduce fire hazard. Burley et al. 2006. But this causes soil to be less nutrient rich, which is important for trees to maintain growing and remain healthy. Littering, specifically cigarettes, is very harmful to forests, as gradually through rain, the chemicals will absorb into the soil. The indigenous belief that all living things are connected aids in the way we view the recovery of Point Pleasant Park. It preaches the idea of us as individuals being responsible for the care of living things. Webster 2017. When reviewing Mi'kmaq teachings, the destruction of the Acadian forest affects everyone and everything, so it is our responsibility to assist in the recovery.
Mackenzie Hewitt completed the background, local context, objectives, results, and discussion for question 2 and the acknowledgements. She was also the guidelines supervisor, checking that the slideshow followed the format in the lab manual, the slideshow editor, and the script editor/proofreader. Sawyer Van Oostrom completed the methods, results, and discussion for question 1, conclusion, and references. She also was the recording coordinator, submitted the slideshow to the discussion board, and submitted the final copy. Finally, a last thank you has to be given to the previous classes of Biology 2060 for collecting the data and Dr. Zigris for compiling the data for this project.